Simon Jackson reclined in his formal lounge, comfortably settled into his recliner. Across from him, an empty couch waited expectantly. Positioned between the two was a coffee table adorned with 3 champagne flutes, one brimming with bubbly, the others devoid of liquid. Adjacent to the table, an ice bucket cradled a chilled bottle of the same sparkling drink. At precisely 7 p.m., Simon, seemingly alone in the room, calmly remarked, "Ah, I hear her car pulling into the driveway." Despite the absence of any onlookers, he maintained his composed demeanor as the front door swung open, the source of the sound concealed from his view. Yet, without delay, the familiar voice of his wife echoed through the space, confirming her arrival. "Where are you, Simon?" "I'm in the formal lounge, Stella." Simon rose abruptly as his wife entered through the archway, her hand intertwined with that of a man perhaps 5 years her junior, a mere shadow of her 49 years. The newcomer, slim and of average height, donned a business suit with a sense of unease lingering around him. In Stella's grasp, an A4 orange envelope hinted at impending revelations. Simon, this is James. James, this is my husband, Simon." Observing Stella's avoidance and palpable nervousness, Simon approached with warmth, extending his hand to the intruder. "I'm very pleased to meet you, James. Do you mind if I call you Jim?" "Not at all, sir." "Oh, please, Simon will be fine. Can I offer you a glass of champagne? Please, won't you both take a seat?" Simon watched as confusion enveloped his guests, yet they obliged, settling onto the couch and accepting the offered glasses. "Cheers. Now do you mind telling this simple soul what's going on?" Stella and Jim exchanged uncertain glances, the latter offering a subtle nod and a reassuring squeeze of Stella's hand. Simon, there's no nice way of saying this, so I'll just come straight out with it. James and I have fallen in love. I would like a divorce so we can get married." She paused, bracing herself for her husband's expected backlash, raising her gaze apprehensively. But Simon's countenance remained neutral, defying her anticipations. Unconsciously, she edged closer to Jim, seeking solace in his presence. "Okay, Stella, are those the divorce papers?" Stella looked up, taken aback. She had rehearsed this scenario countless times in her mind, but never had she imagined such a response. Turning to Jim, she conveyed her bewilderment with a glance that pleaded, "I don't know what to say." Sensing the need to step in, James retrieved the envelope from Stella's hand and placed it delicately on the table. "Yes, Simon, they are," Stella affirmed, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "I think you'll find them very reasonable. Stella is asking for nothing from you but her car. In the packet is her quit claim on this house, your car, all your joint assets, and your retirement fund. Everything is signed and notarized from our side. I should warn you that I am a lawyer, so everything is watertight, but feel free to engage your own representative to reassure yourself." "Well, I must say, you have both been very generous," Simon remarked, his tone carrying a hint of surprise. Stella remained visibly nervous, as if anticipating an impending storm. "That was Jim's idea, Simon. In fact, he insisted," Stella continued, her voice trembling slightly. "He said it was bad enough that he was stealing your wife without taking your hard-earned assets as well. It was in no way my motivation, but Jim is quite wealthy. Even without your money, we will have more than you and I would ever have owned, Simon." Maybe that might have been different if you'd gotten a job after the kids were old enough and helped out with the finances, Stella," Simon retorted, his words laced with a hint of bitterness. Stella lowered her gaze once more, a sense of discomfort lingering in the air. "So, Jim, is your wife going to receive a similar speech to this one, or has she already had it?" Simon inquired, his tone edged with curiosity. "No, my wife passed away 8 years ago. I'm a widower," Jim responded solemnly. "I'm sorry to hear that, Jim, truly," Simon offered his condolences. "Thank you, Simon. It was incredibly painful for a while, but time has a way of healing," Jim replied, his voice tinged with a hint of sorrow. "But look, I need to tell you, I met Stella, and it felt like she was the missing piece of my soul. I never thought I'd feel complete again. I wanted to confess my love for your wife months ago, but she convinced me otherwise." "That's perfectly fine, Jim," I've never been one to hold onto grudges. Please marry her with my blessing, Simon declared, his words resonating with sincerity. Jim and Stella exchanged bemused glances, each processing the unexpected turn of events in their own way. Stella felt a wave of relief wash over her. Months ago, she had led Jim to believe that her marriage to Simon was teetering on the brink of collapse, with little hope of salvation. She knew that the flaw in her plan lay in Simon's potential reaction, which could reveal the truth to Jim. That's why she had pleaded with Jim to handle the situation without a direct confrontation. However, Jim, steadfast in his belief that real men addressed issues head-on, remained resolute. Meanwhile, Jim couldn't help but feel surprised. Despite Stella's assertions about the deteriorating state of her marriage, he had anticipated a more hostile response upon revealing the truth about its demise. He had constructed a mental image of Simon based on Stella's descriptions, a burly, unrefined man accustomed to resolving conflicts through physical means. Jim had briefly entertained the idea of bringing a bodyguard along for protection, but ultimately dismissed it. Somewhere deep down, he acknowledged a desire for a physical altercation with the aggrieved husband, a prospect that weighed heavily on his conscience amidst his own moral struggle with the situation at hand. "So, Stella, I presume you met Jim at one of your girls' nights out." Simon's voice cut through the tension in the room. Stella nodded, her gaze fixed on the coffee table. "One of those harmless outings you reassured me about, right? When I voiced my concerns," Simon continued, his tone tinged with disappointment. Stella's nod shifted downward, her eyes now focused on the floor. "Well, Jimmy boy, I think there's a lesson to be learned here," Simon remarked, glancing briefly at Stella, who avoided his gaze. "Now, what's the plan here? You're getting the house, so I assume you're packing your things, Stella, and moving to his place." "Don't let me get in your way," Simon stated matter-of-factly. "I was planning to do that tomorrow, while you're at work," Stella replied tentatively. "By tomorrow, the locks will be changed. I'm sure your lawyer friend will agree that's a prudent step," Simon retorted. "It would be simpler if you did it now, don't you think?" Stella and Jim rose from their seats, ready to retreat upstairs to begin the daunting task of packing. "How about you stay, Jim? We can have a chat. Stella can start packing." "Come on, let's talk." "I believe you owe me that much," Simon proposed, his eyes fixed on Jim. Stella felt torn between her desire to escape the uncomfortable situation and her curiosity about the impending conversation. Ultimately, Jim's decision to sit back down made the choice for her. "Off you go, Stella. I promise not to harm him. I just want to have a conversation," Simon reassured her, his voice tinged with sincerity. "Until our divorce is finalized, I still feel responsible for your safety. I just want to ensure that he has your best interests at heart. Besides, you've made your decision to leave me. There's no point in trying to talk you out of it. Our marriage is clearly over." Both men watched as Stella ascended the stairs and disappeared from view. "I must say you're handling this very reasonably, Simon," Jim remarked, a note of admiration in his voice. "That's fine, Jim. Honestly, there hasn't been much love coming my way from Stella for about a year now." "I presume that's around the time you two met," Simon replied calmly. "It'll be a relief, really. I have no desire to condemn either of us to a loveless marriage." "You're still showing a lot of decency in all this, Simon," Jim acknowledged. "You're welcome, Jim. Now, as a lawyer, you understand that when you sell a car or a house, you're legally obligated to disclose any known faults to the new owners," Simon stated matter-of-factly. Jim chuckled. "Well, slavery is dead, and I don't think Stella would appreciate being treated as property to be transferred, but I understand your point, Simon." Simon returned the smile, affirming his initial impression of Jim as an intelligent and honorable man. "All right, please understand that what I'm about to say isn't driven by malice. I simply want to highlight some aspects of Stella's character that may not be immediately evident, especially after only a year of knowing her," Simon began, his tone earnest. "Believe it or not, her future happiness is important to me. After all, I've loved her for 27 years. I also want to share with you the efforts I've made to make her happy, even though they've evidently fallen short. That way, you'll be spared the futile attempts." Jim nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. He knew that Simon's intentions might not all be purely altruistic, but he felt a sense of obligation to listen, recognizing Simon's innocence in the matter. "All right, I assume Stella has resumed taking birth control?" Simon inquired, his gaze steady. Jim nodded again, feeling a pang of discomfort. Admitting to using contraception with another man's wife was a weighty acknowledgement. "She's on birth control, yes. I had no idea she had ever stopped. Except, of course, during the times when you had your children," Jim confirmed hesitantly. "She was on birth control when we met, but about 6 to 12 months into our marriage, she decided to stop taking it. According to her, it suppressed her sexual drive. From then until, I presume, she resumed it for you, it's been condoms for me. Can't stand the bloody things. They take all the spontaneity out of it, and I don't know about you, but I struggle to climax with them," Simon explained candidly. "Yes, I completely understand what you mean, Simon," Jim replied, his expression mirroring Simon's frankness. "Then, after we decided to stop at 2 children, she began using condoms as an excuse to avoid intimacy more often. She cited their known failure rate as a reason. I pleaded with her to go back on the pill, but she refused, claiming she didn't want to ingest artificial chemicals daily. Since then, our intimacy has declined from several times a week to several times a month, and eventually to nothing about, well, roughly a year ago," Simon divulged, his tone tinged with a mixture of frustration and resignation. Jim remained silent, absorbing Simon's words. He knew Stella was meticulous about her dietary choices, preferring chemical-free options whenever possible. Their intimacy remained exciting and frequent, occurring at least 3 times a week despite the limitations on their encounters. Simon paused, inviting Jim to interject, but he remained silent, allowing Simon to continue. "Now, another thing I didn't notice until a couple of years into our marriage," Simon continued. "I looked around one day and realized that nearly everything I owned before Stella was gone. The bed, clothes, couch, and even photos of old girlfriends, though, to be fair, I did find those in the attic. I don't know if this is typical of all women or just Stella, but it seemed like she wanted to rid our home of any remnants of previous female influence." Once again, Simon fell silent, and once again, Jim refrained from commenting. His mind drifted to his recently purchased bed and sheet sets, then to his conversation with Stella just a week prior, specifically about the portrait of his late wife, a woman he had cherished until she was tragically taken from him. "I hope you're better at discerning her lies than I am, Jim," Simon remarked, his voice tinged with a hint of bitterness. "Only 3 weeks ago, I asked if she still loved me and if we were still solid. She looked me straight in the eyes and said yes. She even employed that same tactic she always used, gazing into each of my eyes until I was the one to break contact. I can't believe it only took 3 weeks for her love to vanish completely." Jim felt a sense of unease wash over him as he grappled with the unexpected turn of the conversation and the flood of information Simon was imparting. There was something about those last few sentences that set off alarm bells, but he didn't have time to pinpoint the source. Instead, he focused on the one aspect he could grasp. "No worries there, Simon," Jim replied calmly, despite the turmoil brewing within him. "I'm a lawyer. I've spent 20 years honing my skills in spotting liars. They always reveal themselves in the end." "All right, here's some more advice for you. Take it or leave it," Simon continued, his tone matter-of-fact. "Keep an eye out for her removing her rings when she goes off to visit her sister. She's been stashing them in her underwear drawer here for the past few weeks, as far as I know. You might also want to consider tagging along on her girls' nights out. Blind trust got me into this mess, so learn from my mistake. I used to believe she was completely incapable of deceit, but turns out I was just naive. Now, what else can I fill you in on? Oh yeah, if she stays true to form, she'll probably stop hitting the gym in about 6 to 12 months and put on a bit of weight." Simon rose from his seat and retrieved a photo album from a nearby shelf, flipping through the pages. "Here are a couple of photos from 2 years ago, when she started going out for her girls' nights. You can see her face and rear end it a bit fuller. She always struggled to lose that little bit of extra weight, but after 2 kids, who could blame her?" Simon pointed out gesturing to the images. Jim flipped through the pages, his gaze fixated on a slightly plumper version of his fiancée, with noticeably less makeup than he was accustomed to seeing. He was taken aback by the difference a little makeup could make as he continued to peruse the album. "Is this Stella's mother?" Jim inquired, noting the strong resemblance in one of the photographs. "Yes, it is." "Hang on a moment," Simon replied, rising once more to retrieve additional albums. He flipped through them, revealing images of Stella's mother at various stages of her life. "As you can see, she was quite a beauty. This is her around the age of 50, Simon remarked, pointing to one particularly striking photograph. She remained remarkably elegant. Simon then picked up another album and turned to a specific page, waiting for Jim's reaction. "Wow, how old is she here?" Jim asked, noting the significant change in Stella's mother's appearance. "About 55. She was one of those women who, upon reaching menopause around 52 or 53, experienced a rapid decline in her physical appearance. However, she handled it with grace, expressing gratitude for the outward beauty she had been blessed with for so long," Simon explained, observing Jim's alternating gaze between the two photographs. Simon recalled the celebration of Stella's mother's 49th birthday 2 months prior, a gathering that Stella had arranged to coincide with her actual birthday weekend, which she claimed she would spend with her sister. He noted the shift in Jim's demeanor, seizing the opportunity to press on. "Now, as I promised, I'll divulge all the mistakes I made in attempting to maintain Stella's affection. I suggest you take a different approach, as mine clearly fell short," Simon continued, pouring fresh glasses of champagne for both of them. "Now, if history repeats itself, she'll likely want a lavish wedding like ours 25 years ago," Simon remarked, a hint of wistfulness in his voice. I tried to object, suggesting we invest the money in a home instead, but she managed to guilt me into it. She argued that if I truly believed in our eternal bond, I wouldn't hesitate to splurge on her big day. I can dig up a copy of our wedding vows for you if you're interested. If memory serves me right, we stuck to the traditional love, honor, obey, and forsaking all others. But if you try something different, you might fare better than I did. Another piece of advice: don't exhaust yourself with endless overtime to fulfill her desires for a grand home. Clearly, that didn't prevent her from straying, Simon continued, his tone tinged with bitterness. And while I'm at it, don't bother tending to her every need if she falls ill with glandular fever again. It didn't do me any favors. Nor did going into debt to finance the breast implants and tummy tuck she desired 2 years ago. Come to think of it, we might be in this situation because I refused to foot the bill for the facelift she yearned for, opting instead to secure our retirements. Stella can be quite tenacious when she sets her mind on something. You've probably noticed. Jim nodded thoughtfully, his previous admiration for Stella's persistence now tinged with skepticism. Now I thought I was being clever by scheduling a monthly date night and encouraging open discussions about any grievances or concerns in our relationship, Simon continued, his tone tinged with a hint of resignation. Our last date was less than a month ago, and she didn't mention anything. I'm sure a man of your caliber can devise a more effective approach. Jim suddenly noticed a mischievous glint in Simon's eyes and realized his ulterior motive. Nonetheless, Simon had raised some valid points. The notion of Stella being devoid of deception struck a chord with Jim, aligning with his own recent reflections. Despite his growing discomfort with Simon's apparent amusement, Jim chose to ignore his internal alarms once again. Undeterred by their mutual awareness that Stella had ceased her descent down the stairs, Simon pressed on with his advice. Keep an eye out for lists of belongings she plans to remove from the house upon your separation. It's a clear indication that she's already disregarding your marriage and seeking out your replacement, Simon advised, his voice carrying a sense of urgency. While it may not change the outcome significantly, it will prepare you mentally for the endgame she has orchestrated and prompt you to seek out additional evidence elsewhere. Jim blinked and scanned the room, finally noticing the 3 champagne glasses and the ice bucket, a clear indication that all 3 individuals present had prior knowledge of today's meeting, when it was supposed to be just between him and Simon. In the rush of his arrival, Jim's typically keen observational skills had failed him, and Simon observed Jim's eyes darting around the scene. Yeah, I knew tonight was the night. Stella called me twice today to confirm I'd be home by 7, Simon explained, meeting Jim's gaze evenly. Jim's attention shifted momentarily toward where Stella was halfway down the stairs. Stella resumed her descent, seemingly pretending she hadn't caught wind of the recent conversation. Simon, do you want to discuss which family photos I can take now, or shall we do it another time? Stella interjected, attempting to divert the conversation. Ignoring Stella, Simon leaned forward, maintaining eye contact with his adversary on the opposite couch. One mistake I may have made was forgiving Stella the first time I caught her betraying our marriage, Simon confessed, his words hitting Jim like a ton of bricks. What? Jim exclaimed, startled. No, Stella's voice interjected, already retreating hastily into the kitchen. Yes, it was shortly after the birth of our second child, Simon began, his voice carrying a weight of reflection. I forgave her because she and our counselor convinced me it was a one-time mistake brought on by postnatal depression. Looking back, I've often questioned if I was too lenient. Perhaps a firmer stance at the time could have prevented a recurrence. I justified my actions then as being in the best interests of the kids, and they've grown into fine adults, so hopefully I made the right choice for them. For her sake, I hope you find it in your heart to forgive her when your time comes. I don't know what to say, Simon, Jim stammered, caught off guard by the gravity of Simon's revelation. No need to say anything, Jim. Just ask yourself this. Would you forgive your late wife if you found her in bed with someone else in your own home? Simon posed the question, his gaze steady. For the first time in nearly an hour, Jim's composure faltered. He leaned forward, and Simon noticed movement out of the corner of his eye as Stella appeared in the kitchen doorway, her complexion pale with fear. My wife would never have disrespected me like that. We loved each other too. Wait a minute. You mentioned the first time Stella cheated on you. Were there other occasions? Jim questioned, his voice tinged with disbelief. No, just the 2 times. Then, and now, Simon confirmed, his tone resigned. Stella burst out of the kitchen, her voice desperate. I've finished packing, Jim. If you grab my bags, we can leave now. Be quiet, Stella. Jim's voice cut through the tension, low but firm. Stella froze in her tracks, stunned by Jim's sudden assertiveness. Jim turned back to face Simon. Stella told me you had an open marriage, Simon. Did she look you in the eye when she told you that, Jim? Simon countered, observing Jim's uncertain expression. Jim glanced between Simon and Stella, then back to Simon again. Simon could see in Jim's eyes the dawning realization that his ability to discern lies wasn't as sharp as he thought. What did Stella say about the state of our marriage, Jim? Simon inquired, his voice measured. She said it had been rocky for a few years, Simon, that you both had been in counseling, but there wasn't much hope, Jim replied, his tone tinged with uncertainty. Simon remained silent, his gaze fixed on Jim, prompting him to continue speaking to fill the uneasy silence. Now that I think about it, what you said doesn't really align with the fact that you still have date nights and inquire if she still loves you, Jim mused, attempting to reconcile the inconsistencies. Simon maintained his steady gaze, waiting for the moment Jim realized he had been deceived. A wave of self-loathing washed over Jim's face as the truth dawned on him. Turning to Stella, Jim erupted in anger. You've made me into the very thing I despise the most, a man who sleeps with other men's wives without their knowledge. Jim's accusation sent Stella collapsing to her knees, her fixate shattered. Speechless, Jim turned his attention to the floor, grappling with the weight of his realization. After a moment, he looked back at Simon, pleading for understanding. Please, Simon, you have to believe me. I had no idea. Jim trailed off, his voice filled with desperation. Don't worry about it, Jim. I warned you she was a skilled liar, Simon replied wryly. Honestly, I wish she had told me we had an open marriage. At least then I might have had some action in the past year. The unexpected humor in the tense situation eased the atmosphere slightly, though Jim remained subdued. In that case, does this mean the engagement is off? Jim asked tentatively. Yes, definitely, Simon confirmed. In that case, there are a couple of people I want you to meet, Simon continued, gesturing toward the door to the basement. Daniel, Emma. As the door to the basement opened, Jim turned to see a young man and woman approaching. Daniel extended his hand to Jim, while Emma nodded in acknowledgement. Jim, I'd like you to meet my son Daniel and daughter Emma. They've been listening to our conversations via a microphone, Simon explained. Daniel graduated from law school 2 years ago, and Emma will finish her science degree this year. Both Daniel and Emma shook Jim's hand, their expressions unreadable. Daniel retrieved the envelope from the table, examining its contents with detachment. Simon turned to his daughter, seeking validation. "Do you believe me now, Emma?" Simon inquired. "Yes, Dad." "There's no doubt she is one cold, conniving schemer," Emma replied firmly. All heads turned towards the groan, and their gaze fell upon Stella, still on her knees, her head buried in her hands against the floor. Sensing the weight of the accusing stares, Stella abruptly rose to her feet and fled out the front door, her departure met with a resigned silence. No one moved to stop or pursue her. Meanwhile, Daniel calmly finished perusing the contents of the envelope. "It all seems to be in order, Dad," Daniel remarked. "Good, thanks. Now, who fancies a beer? That fizzy cat's piss is fine, but I could really use a beer to wash the taste out of my mouth," Simon declared. I think I should go," Jim interjected nervously. "You stay right here, Jimmy boy. We still have some matters to address," Simon retorted firmly. "Like what?" Jim inquired, his apprehension palpable. "Well, I can forgive you for sleeping with the dim-witted woman, believing her claims of an open marriage, and all that nonsense. But I've yet to decide whether to tear your head off and spit down your neck for attempting to steal her away," Simon replied, his voice carrying a hint of menace. Jim glanced up at Simon, noticing the height and bulk advantage the other man held, likely due to his manual labor. Then he met Simon's gaze and detected a mischievous twinkle, causing Jim to regret not bringing backup. He could have requested they handle their own client until the lesson of his naivety was firmly learned. Feeling uncertain about where he stood now, Jim awaited clarity from Simon. "Daniel is in the same line of law as you are, Jim," Simon disclosed, shedding light on his knowledge. Jim wasn't surprised by Simon's insight. Suddenly, realization dawned on him. "How's your current job, Daniel?" Jim inquired. "The hours are terrible, and the salary leaves much to be desired," Daniel admitted candidly. "Would you like to come and work with me?" Jim offered. "Absolutely," Daniel exclaimed enthusiastically. Simon grinned, satisfied with the turn of events. "Then there's the matter of my ex-wife's upkeep until she can find a job. Thanks to your excellent work, she no longer has a house or any money," Simon stated, his tone carrying a hint of concern. With a growing feeling of relief, Jim entered into the new spirit. "I'm sorry, Simon. As soon as she lied to me, she breached the implied contract we had. In cases of breach of contract, ownership reverts to the previous title holder." "Yes, but morally," Simon pressed, searching for a sense of responsibility from Jim. "Don't talk to me about morals. I'm a lawyer. Daniel, do you have a dictionary? Look up the word morals, will you? I'm a bit hazy on what it actually means," Jim quipped, eliciting laughter from everyone present. "No, seriously, Jim. I think you owe it to me to look after her until she's back on her feet. If you play your cards right, you can pretend to be considering keeping her and get the hell spoiled out of you in bed for a while," Simon suggested, trying to inject a hint of levity into the conversation. Jim recoiled. "Oh, no, I couldn't go there. I will see she's taken care of, though. Not for her, but for you. I admire skill wherever I see it, and I've been totally outclassed tonight, haven't I? Have you ever considered a career in law, Simon? The way you kept me off balance by posing negatives as positives and never giving me time to think was worthy of the best prosecutor I've ever seen." Simon smiled modestly but didn't respond. He cherished his job and the camaraderie of his colleagues. "Right, that's 4 beers then, is it?" Simon changed the subject, his gaze momentarily drifting away. By this time, Stella Jackson was 700 meters away, on foot, still accelerating away from the burning bridges she had left behind. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, please like it and subscribe to the channel. See you soon.